giving you my updated wide receiver rankings ahead of your fantasy football drafts, starting it off in the S tier. And the first two guys in the S tier are going to be Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb. Listen, a lot of people have CeeDee Lamb as wide receiver 1. I have Tyreek Hill as wide receiver 1. And the main reason I have Tyreek Hill as wide receiver 1 is because I have him higher up in the projections. As much as CeeDee Lamb is still really the only major weapon in this Dallas Cowboys offense with Mike McCarthy, I think Tyreek Hill is playing in a better offense with a better play caller in Mike McDaniel. So really, it is really up to you whether you want CeeDee Lamb, who has less target competition than a guy like Tyreek Hill, but Tyreek Hill has ultimate game level upside. So I kind of have these guys in their own tier. Listen, I'm going to put more guys in this tier, but I just wanted to say that it's between Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb at the top for me. The next guys in this S tier, and it's going to be a tier of 3 for me, it's going to be Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. And listen, there's plenty of people out there that have Amon-Ra St. Brown as their wide receiver 1 in fantasy football heading into 2024. And so I'm of the mindset, and a lot of people that have Justin Jefferson ahead of both these guys, the reason that I am stamping it on Jamar Chase is because I think Jamar Chase last year, we were about to see an absolute explosion, but then we saw Joe Burrow have all of that shoulder issue and be out for essentially the season. Jamar Chase still finished decently. Now, the argument between Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson is we've seen Justin Jefferson, no matter what the elite level quarterback play, still produce on a top 5 fantasy points per game level. So I think Justin Jefferson is still a shoo-in to be a top 5 overall wide receiver. But if I'm sitting here and I need an ultimate level shot to get to the wide receiver 1 overall, I do think Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow has a higher percent chance to get there just based on a more of an elite level quarterback play than what Justin Jefferson's going to do. Listen, I think Justin Jefferson's a more talented wide receiver than Jamar Chase. So if you're going to argue with me on that, I am not debating that. I am just saying that I would much rather have Jamar Chase in fantasy football for 2024 than Justin Jefferson. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, I would say out of pretty much these guys is the safest. So if you're a guy that in the first round, you're like, hey, I don't want my first round pick to bust, I want absolute safety, that is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I do think Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson have overall better upside in the fantasy football rankings. So let me know what you think of this tier in fantasy football. This is the S tier. This is the clear tier for me. And then we'll move on to the A tier. The next guys in this big tier for me is going to be the A tier. We got AJ Brown, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, and Marvin Harrison Jr. And we started off with AJ Brown. AJ Brown, the last 2 seasons, has finished as an overall wide receiver 8 in points per game. And I think a lot of people like AJ Brown, absolutely electric alpha level wide receiver for this Philadelphia Eagles offense. We've seen the upside. It's been pretty big booms, and he's had some pretty low lows. So for me with AJ Brown, where's that overall consistency? I think if you miss out and you're having to take AJ Brown in the back end of the first, if you're missing out on, like we said, these first tier of guys, the S tier, I do think AJ Brown has the chance to be on par with them on a points per game basis. So there is a shot that you could argue that maybe AJ Brown should be included in that tier above. I do think there is enough distinguish between AJ Brown and like a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown that I do have AJ Brown here. But if you get him in the back end and you're able to double tap the wide receiver position or get AJ Brown an elite level running back like a Jonathan Taylor, I like it. I think it's a good start to your draft. So I do like AJ Brown here in the A tier. The next guy is going to be Puka Nacua, and Puka Nacua absolutely burst onto the scene last year. Waiver wire darling, won a lot of people their fantasy football championship, and Puka Nacua has kind of dropped a few spots, not only due to kind of the injury, just I think a lot of people how they're projecting Puka Nacua. I still feel very confident in Puka Nacua, even with a healthy Cooper Kupp back. So I feel confident putting him here as my overall wide receiver 7. You could be making the argument that maybe you take Puka Nacua over AJ Brown going into year 2, but I do like this overall tier here. Garrett Wilson's the next guy in this tier, and I think if you watch my top 50 overall players, I've been flip-flopping a lot between my value on Devontae Adams and my value on Garrett Wilson. If I'm purely telling you who I want to draft, I want to draft Garrett Wilson. But if I'm listening to my heart, my overall projections, Devontae Adams. So in a bunch of drafts, I've kind of been flip-flopping who I'm drafting, especially in the early part of the second, because that's where you're taking Garrett Wilson or Devontae Adams. I think both are in for major targets. I just like the fact that Garrett Wilson's getting the ball thrown to him by Aaron Rodgers. Devontae Adams has Gardner Minshew. So both of them are really good values in the early part of the second. I think a lot of people, if you're talking, hey, maybe you got an RB, you drafted Saquon or Jonathan Taylor in the first round, and you come back around, you're able to get Garrett Wilson, or even if you take Garrett Wilson at the back end of the first, and then you're able to get one of those running backs. I do think Garrett Wilson, based on everything that I've seen, and we've done the metrics, we've broken down in plenty of videos. So if you want to go check out some videos where I talk about the splits with Garrett Wilson, with Zach Wilson, and even backup quarterbacks, Garrett Wilson is that type of dude that if we get even a marginal quarterback upgrade from Zach Wilson, Garrett Wilson's absolutely going to eat on a fantasy points per game basis. I love some Garrett Wilson. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. rounds out this A tier for me. And the part that I do want to talk about with Marvin Harrison Jr. is he's the most expensive rookie wide receiver you've ever had to select in fantasy football. I mean, when we look back on guys like Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or even CeeDee Lamb as rookies, they were not going in this part of the draft. You're having to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. between the 201 and like the 205. And hear me out. I'm an Ohio State Buckeye fan. You see the CJ Stroud and Garrett Wilson jerseys behind me. There's a lot to like with Marvin Harrison Jr. We haven't seen Kyler Murray have an elite level wide receiver prospect and worked with him. We've seen him with like DeAndre Hopkins. We've seen him with Hollywood Brown, but even Larry Fitzgerald, but we haven't seen him with Marvin Harrison Jr. So I am excited for Marvin Harrison Jr. I think it's a great landing spot. Where's he going to finish this year? I do think he's going to get a ton of targets, but I do think the value on him and the upside of a guy like Malik Neighbors is going later in the draft. Makes me a little bit nervous for Marvin Harrison Jr. as well. So let me know what you're thinking about Marvin Harrison Jr., but this is kind of the S and A tier. And we start off this B tier, and it is a massive tier for me when I'm looking at my overall wide receiver rankings. And Nico Collins starts off this tier, and I think Nico Collins is the clear alpha level wide receiver for CJ Stroud and this Houston Texans offense. Listen, there's a lot of mouths to feed with both him. They add Stephon Diggs, you got Tank Dell back, but Nico Collins actually performed better with Tank Dell in the lineup than he did without Tank Dell. So I do think Nico Collins isn't going to get hurt as much as Tank Dell. As much as I love the talent of Tank Dell, I just think Nico Collins, elite level value, he is going to be the one in this Houston Texans offense, and that's going to be super valuable starting off the B tier. Next guy is going to be Drake London, and I think the disparity between Drake London and Marvin Harrison Jr. definitely needs to be talked about because Drake London hasn't had a quarterback, elite level prospect, and now he's going into year 3. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to year 1, and so both of their situations are very similar, but we're giving the benefit of the doubt to the rookie over a guy like Drake London, whereas I think you're maybe getting a little bit of production discount on Drake London. You're having to take him in the middle of the second. You usually actually have to take Drake London ahead of Nico Collins. I've seen a lot more people like Drake London than Nico Collins. I have Nico Collins a spot ahead. So depending on how you view Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix, best quarterbacks that Drake London's played up to this point in their career, like some Drake London. Next guy in the tier is going to be Mike Evans. And Mike Evans is Mr. Consistent 1,000-yard receiver, 12 total touchdowns. Now with no Dave Canales, how is this overall offense going to look? The part that we do know is that Baker Mayfield liked to chuck the ball down to Mike Evans. He actually performed better with Baker Mayfield than he did with Tom Brady. So no reason to be scared. I think Mike Evans, another year where he's probably criminally undervalued. You're getting him in the early part of the third. Absolutely love Mike Evans. Next two guys, Jalen Waddle and Chris Olave. Jalen Waddle, I think, is one of the most every year hyped up wide receivers in fantasy football that always performs as a high-end wide receiver too. So I felt like I did a pretty good value with Jalen Waddle because I think in this offense, another year with Tyreek Hill getting a little bit older, they do have a ton of weapons. So I'm not saying that Jalen Waddle is going to be the clear alpha. I'm not saying that Jalen Waddle is going to get 150 targets because that's not going to happen. But I will say that when Jalen Waddle was absolutely healthy last year, he had major boom potential. And honestly, his floor was a lot more reasonable than a lot of people were thinking. So I do think Jalen Waddle heading into 2024, you have to take a shot on him somewhere. And especially, I want as many pieces of this Miami Dolphins that I can. Give me some Jalen Waddle. Next guy, like we said, is going to be Chris Olave. Chris Olave, very similar to a guy like Drake London, where he's getting insane amount of targets, just very crappy targets from really crappy quarterbacks. The only difference between him and Drake London this year, though, is that Chris Olave did not get a quarterback upgrade. But Chris Olave, it's pretty much the Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara show in the Saints offense. So Chris Olave, definitely, this could be a little bit low of ranking. Listen, I'm a Buckeye fan. I'm cheering for Chris Olave. I just don't have the utmost faith that he could be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football in 2024. The ceiling is probably back end wide receiver 1 on a points per game basis. The floor feels like wide receiver 15, wide receiver 16. So that's why I have him placed right here. Next guy is going to be Brandon Ayuk. Of course, we've had all the trade rumors from the San Francisco 49ers. Brandon Ayuk landing back with the 49ers, I think, is probably the best thing for his fantasy football value. If he went to the Steelers, listen, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, they announced Russell Wilson as the starter with Arthur Smith as the QB. We all realized the headaches that Kyle Pitts and Drake London put us in last year. Would not want to have to deal with that with George Pickens and Brandon Ayuk. So I think it's the best case scenario for Brandon Ayuk, who was the best wide receiver in that San Francisco 49ers offense last year. The San Francisco 49ers, according to Vegas, are projected to score the most points, those touchdowns in 2024. So there's going to be enough volume to go around between CMC, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel. Now, we could have maybe debated Devontae Smith and Deebo Samuel. You could probably debate with me who would I actually prefer here. And when we're thinking about this is how I have in my rankings. But ladies and gentlemen, we are doing this on the fly. I actually prefer Deebo Samuel and Cooper Kupp over over Devontae Smith, and here's why. Deebo Samuel, like we said, elite level touchdown upside. I put out my wide receiver rankings maybe 2 weeks ago, and someone said, hey, Caleb, I really think I had like Deebo Samuel down at like wide receiver 26. And they said, hey, you might need to look into Deebo Samuel, look into this offense. That's when I looked into the points projected. This is when I looked into the overall touchdown upside, because I think for me, I know Deebo Samuel is touchdown dependent. They use him in so many different ways. He's also getting up there in age. A lot of concerns for me with Deebo Samuel, but I think the overall offense and the volume is going to supplant and make Deebo Samuel a very good fantasy football wide receiver for you. And so I can't discount that enough with that overall upside that this possesses with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Next guy is going to be Cooper Kupp, and reports out of camp are that Cooper Kupp is looking absolutely electric, that he's back to full health, which is exactly with what we want to hear in this offense. Dude's an absolute target hog. Now, taking Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, who's going to be the alpha, I assume it's going to be Puka Nacua just because Puka Nacua is younger, a lot more explosive, but Cooper Kupp in that great refined route running makes it very excited. Devontae Smith with this elite level Philadelphia Eagles offense is going to get plenty of opportunity next to AJ Brown. They brought in Saquon Barkley, so how is that going to hurt maybe his receptions, because the last few years with Kenny Gainwell and or last year with DeAndre Swift as well, Devontae Smith was able to maintain a really good target share, the clear number 2. Now, if Saquon really starts funneling in a ton more volume, that is the part that makes me a little bit nervous about the ceiling, but he is in such an efficient offense that Devontae Smith has to be taken here. And the last guy in this tier is going to be Malik Neighbors, and this is my highest rated ranking of Malik Neighbors. I am drinking the rookie Kool-Aid, ladies and gentlemen, and the part with Malik Neighbors is I think there's going to be enough volume from Malik Neighbors to get, like we said, similar to what Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably going to get, 140 to 150 targets for the Giants. Now, I'm not saying it's great targets because it is Daniel Jones, but I do think the explosion, the way that people are talking about him coming out of camp, you have to just see these buying signs. And especially when you're able to get Malik Neighbors, you used to be able to get him like in the 5th, the early part of the 5th, then he went in the back end of the 4th. As we're approaching the season, you're having to draft him in like the 401 to like 404 range. And I think that's a really appropriate value for Malik Neighbors, kind of rounding out this B tier for me. We move it over to the C tier, and we got a bunch more guys. Like I said, DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, Zay Flowers, Amari Cooper, T. Higgins, Deontay Johnson, DK Metcalf, Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, and Jaden Reed. Listen, if you wanted to convince me on DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, and you want to say, hey, Caleb, I got to put those guys ahead of Malik Neighbors, I wouldn't hate you. I wouldn't hate you because I do think these tiers are so close. But DJ Moore is getting the best quarterback of his life. He just finished as the wide receiver 6 on a points per game basis. All signs are pointing up for DJ Moore. The only negative for DJ Moore is the fact that they brought in Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen to compete with targets. I do think this offense is going to be more efficient, but even still, I think the DJ Moore hype of we're thinking, hey, can he get to 140 targets is probably not within reach this year. He's probably going to end up with 120, which puts him in a similar range. I just think the issue for me is, can he get those touchdowns? Is he going to have huge breakout games? If we don't remember, he had a huge game against the Panthers where he put up, what was it? It was like 50 fantasy points in one game. He's going to need a huge amount of touchdown upside, which he saw last year. I'm just a little bit concerned, and that's why I do not have him in the B tier. I have him in the C tier, and that could be super low. You could be telling me I'm an idiot. Let me know down below. My next guy is going to be Stephon Diggs, and so Stephon Diggs lands on a new home after that pitiful end of the season, but of course now there's Nico Collins and Tank Dell, so we're going to have to see how Stephon Diggs is able to react and play with CJ Stroud. I think the overall upside is capped. I still think Nico Collins is going to take that role, but you should take some shots. I think the issue is if us thinking that, hey, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell are all going to perform, that's just going to be a major season outlier. It's been, I can't even remember how many seasons since we've seen 3 wide receivers in the same overall offense finish as top 36 wide receivers. So that's the part for me that makes Stephon Diggs a little bit more worrisome. We move on to the next kind of guy. Zay Flowers is going to be the clear alpha for Baltimore Ravens offense with Lamar Jackson, Todd Monken in year 2. Mark Andrews is back fully healthy, so that should help Zay Flowers be a little bit more productive. But we saw even last year in the playoffs, Zay Flowers absolutely started to break out. So if he can continue that trajectory, I think Zay Flowers reminds us a lot of like almost like an Antonio Brown type wide receiver, which is exciting with him paired with Lamar Jackson. So I do think that is a good value to be having some Zay Flowers. Amari Cooper absolutely looked good last year. The big worry with Amari Cooper is with Deshaun Watson and that shoulder. They do not have Joe Flacco, because that Joe Flacco was the one that absolutely got Amari Cooper cooking. Can Amari cook without Joe Flacco? That's why I have him here in the C tier. T. Higgins, I love me some T. Higgins. I think it's a contract year. I think the Bengals need to pay the boy, but I think T. Higgins also needs to show they can be healthy. And I think the overall touchdown upside, the same things that applied with Jamar Jamar Chase, apply to T. Higgins, because if for some reason Joe Burrow's out, I mean, T. Higgins essentially dust. Like that's what we saw clearly last year. So we have to assume that if it's a full season healthy for T. Higgins, a lot of exciting things. Next guy is going to be Deontay Johnson, Mr. 150 target earner himself. Besides last year was a little bit of a weird year with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Add him now into the Carolina Panthers offense. Dave Canales said this offense is only going to go as far as Deontay Johnson's going to take us. I think Deontay Johnson gets back to that 140, 150 targets in a better offense where he is the clear number one with Bryce Young, like the overall value here in the C tier. Next guy is going to be DK Metcalf, new coaching staff with Ryan Grubb as well. So DK Metcalf, we haven't really seen that full potential the last 2 seasons on a points per game basis. He's been good some weeks. I mean, last year against the Cowboys, dude, absolutely ate, but it's been pretty hit or miss where you were having to draft him as like a borderline wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and now he's very clearly in this wide receiver 2 category for me. Next guy is going to be Christian Kirk. I know they have Brian Thomas in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense, but the last 2 years, Christian Kirk has been the steady fantasy football wide receiver that you want in this offense. So I have Christian Kirk here in the C tier. Chris Godwin, I think the Bucks, they're like an okay team, but they're not like a great team. So they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. Last year, Chris Godwin, it was a down year. I will say Mike Evans was kind of stole the show, but let's not forget that Chris Godwin back in 2019 was a wide receiver 2 on a points per game basis. So he definitely has overall elite level upside. He is getting older, so there are those concerns in this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, but Chris Godwin feels like a good value here in the C tier. And rounding out the C tier, I got Jaden Reed. And I know there's a lot of talk of Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. Like a lot of people like Tavion Wicks as a late round flyer. I still think Jaden Reed is the clear one. If you look at the way that he broke out last year towards the end of the season, very similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown as a rookie. If he can continue that height, we could be talking about an absolute steal that you're getting later on in your drafts. So I have him here rounding out my C tier. We move on here to the D tier, and we got Michael Pittman Jr., Terry McLaurin, Keenan Allen, Tank Dell, Rashee Rice, Brian Thomas, Christian Watson, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, Curtis Samuel. Starting off with Michael Pittman, and I have been a clear not Michael Pittman Jr. guy. And I think the main reason is because I think he's a Jag. I actually do live here in Indiana. Got a bunch of friends that are Colts fans, and I'll be honest, I feel like everyone's always impressed with the Indianapolis Colts, Michael Pittman Jr. because of the target share, because they see the metrics and like, oh, this dude, if things broke right for him, it'd be absolutely amazing. But for those of us that watch Colts games, we know he's probably just like a glorified possession receiver that's tall, that where's that ultimate level upside? What, maybe finishing as like wide receiver 14 on a points per game basis? But when I get to these parts, I want to talk through guys that can absolutely make or break my team, because as we all know, fantasy football, you either come in first or you come in last. There's literally no middle ground. There is a middle ground. You want to be in the top 6 teams to make the playoffs, but I want ultimate level upside, and I don't always believe Michael Pittman Jr. has that. So that's why I have him here starting off the D tier. I think the floor is a lot better than the ceiling. Next guy's going to be Terry McLaurin. Ohio State Buckeye fandom coming out again. Terry McLaurin has maybe, I don't want to say the best quarterback of his career because we haven't seen Jane Daniels throw the ball or do anything electric, but I think with this revolutionized offense under Cliff Kingsbury, Terry McLaurin is a dude you need to target because they just got rid of John Dotson. So Terry McLaurin, this could be a criminal ranking of Terry McLaurin with the overall targets. He could end up getting like 150 targets in this offense. Dude's absolutely electric down the field. He is getting older. He is getting up there in age. We are in the prime of his career, but we also haven't seen him be an absolute fantasy football stud. I feel like he's a better real life wide receiver than an actual fantasy football stud. So just want to put that in consideration here in the D tier. Next guy's going to be Keenan Allen, Mr. 120 to 130 targets himself. He gets traded from the Chargers to the Bears, and Keenan Allen looks like he's put on a little bit of weight, maybe lost a little bit of the speed out of the slot. So I am a little bit concerned about Keenan Allen. I'm not going to lie, but he does have Caleb Williams, who I think is just on the same level of a passer as Justin Herbert. We're going to have to see how that plays out, but I do think the target competition between Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze caps all their overall upsides. Now you're going to have to draft him because if something were to happen, I mean, we haven't seen Keenan Allen really play a full season ever. So if something were to happen to Keenan Allen, or, something happens to DJ Moore or Rome Odunze, I do think that benefits whatever wide receivers are left. So it is a little bit of Russian roulette with these Bears wide receivers. Next guy too, Tank Dell. I think putting Tank Dell this low feels criminal because Tank Dell, if we're talking talent wise, probably should be close to the B tier. But since he's here in this tier, what's this overall target share going to be like in this Houston Texans offense? I think that's the part that I keep getting back to. And I think if Nico Collins is still going to eat, if Stephon Diggs, I think regresses slightly, but not much, that's not leaving a whole lot for Tank Dell. So same exact thing with Keenan Allen. Tank Dell's almost going to need an injury to one of those top two guys for me to really feel comfortable in. And this could easily bite me in the butt because I do think Tank Dell is a super talented wide receiver. I'm all over Tank Dell in 2024 fantasy football. The next guy in this tier is going to be Rashee Rice. And this Kansas City Chiefs offense last year was pretty much the Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce show. And Rashee Rice didn't even get on the fantasy football field, didn't even get on the football field until like week 8. Now we're assuming there's no suspension. It's looking like that's going to be kind of tried. That criminal court case is going to be tried postseason. So that means that Rashee Rice has every ability to play all the games this season. And right now his ADP is slowly climbing back up the board. So if you drafted last week or you drafted even earlier this week, you got a good price on Rashee Rice. And I have him cemented here in my D tier. And I think if I'm being honest with myself, this is a very conservative ranking. In drafts, I might put Rashee Rice like over here. Like that's how I feel about him. I just think there's a lot of mouths to feed in this overall Kansas City offense. So I can, tell myself when I'm on the clock, I can give myself all this hopium about Rashee Rice. I'm just being realistic because they also brought in Xavier Worthy. They brought in Hollywood Brown. A lot of things to consider here in the D tier. Brian Thomas Jr. absolutely making waves at this Jacksonville Jaguars camp. Think he's going to be the clear wide receiver 2. There's a potential that he's wide receiver 1. Thing that he was at LSU, huge touchdown upside. So I do feel very comfortable with Brian Thomas there. Next guy is going to be Christian Watson, and Christian Watson worked on his hamstrings this offseason. So with him working on those hamstrings, can the man stay healthy? Because I like Jaden Reed more. A lot of people like Christian Watson more than Jaden Reed, and they're saying that Christian Watson should be the alpha. He got the second round draft capital only a few years ago. Can he maintain health? And I think that's why his ranking's here, but he's ultimate boom bust. Like he's either going to make it or he's going to break it for your fantasy football team. So just want you to know that, and that's why I have him here in the D tier. Next two guys are going to be the Tennessee Titans wide receivers, and I don't know how to rank them because Calvin Ridley got the contract. We've heard that they want to use Calvin Ridley like Jamar Chase. They want to use DeAndre Hopkins like T. Higgins from Callahan's offense with the Bengals. Calvin Ridley had like 1 or 2 good weeks last year and really was kind of a bust at his fantasy football ADP. DeAndre Hopkins continues to get up there in age. So what's the target share going to be like? I mean, there's no more Derrick Henry. So we don't even know what this Tennessee Titans revamped offense is going to look like. They could both eat. This could be a super low ranking for both of them. It's just hard for me to push them any higher. And then the last guy is going to be Curtis Samuel, who I believe Curtis Samuel, you honestly don't have to draft him this high. There's some guys that we're going to talk about a little bit later that are going ahead of Curtis Samuel, but I think Curtis Samuel is the one for the Buffalo Bills and the guy that I'm going to want to draft and take a shot on. Listen, I love some Keon Coleman. I think his story is great as a rookie level wide receiver. I just think he's not refined as guys we're talking about like a Brian Thomas or a Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbor. So I'm a little bit more worried to draft Keon Coleman. Curtis Samuel, I'm perfectly happy drafting because I think this is the best offense that he's played on up to this point in his career. Absolutely love it. Moving on to the E tier. And before any of y'all freaking freak out, I just wanted to make a comment, a public service announcement. I forgot to add George Pickens into when I was making my tier. So I didn't talk about him. I realized as I'm recording this, he is in my C tier. I do have him here. I do think George Pickens, as much as I'm worried about Arthur Smith and everything that's happening, I do have him behind Christian Kirk and DK Metcalf and Deontay Johnson. I do think he has a lot of upside this year, a lot of great catches, a lot of alpha level ability. Just wanted to make that public service announcement in the C tier. I'm sure I'm going to see some of your comments, but he is in the C tier. Moving on to the E tier. I would call this like the rookie level tier, the upside tier. And we started off with Lab McConkey, who Lab McConkey is going to be the wide receiver 1 for the Chargers, but I don't know how efficient that's going to be for fantasy football purposes. I know a lot of people are excited, and you could probably talk and say, hey, Lab should be closer to Brian Thomas Jr. In your rankings, Caleb, you're being an absolute dummy when ranking Lab McConkey. The part for me is I'm a little bit worried about his overall upside. I think, can he be like a Hunter Renfrow type? Yes. But can he be like a Cooper Kupp elite level slot wide receiver type? Still to be determined. I mean, he is not your typical average athlete. This dude did run a 4.39 40-yard dash time, so he does have very quick explosion. I just have him here in the E tier. Next guy's going to be Xavier Worthy, who ran even a faster 40, ran, what was a 4.28? Absolutely fastest 40 that we've ever seen. Put him on the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. We've already seen the highlight plays in preseason camp. The worry for me with Xavier Worthy is what's the volume going to look like? He had an absolute crazy dominator rating coming out of the University of Texas, broke out as a true freshman. I'm excited to see what he's able to do, but there is a lot of mouths to feed in this offense because as you see later on this year, there's a guy like Hollywood Brown. And Hollywood Brown, we have seen put up in his peak like middling wide receiver 20 numbers, but he's never played with Patrick Mahomes. He played with Lamar Jackson, played with Kyler Murray, but Patrick Mahomes is on a different level. And defenses aren't going to be able to key in on Hollywood Brown because you got to key in on Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, potentially Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. It's going to be an exciting offense. So I just don't know between Hollywood and Xavier. One of them's going to break out. One of them's probably going to bust. I have both of them here because I think this is a valuable, appropriate range for me to be taking that upside shot. Next guy is going to be JSN. And like we said, this Ohio State bias continues. JSN showed nothing last year, but I really blame that on the scheme and Pete Carroll, the way that he really wasn't running routes downfield. I think with Ryan Grubb, they've talked about the ways that they are looking to get JSN involved. I think JSN's a talented wide receiver. I mean, JSN out-targeted Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave at Ohio State as a true sophomore. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were pulling away targets. I don't care. JSN is an elite level prospect. We didn't get to see it last year. He dealt with an injury, that hand injury that slowed him down at the beginning of the season, and then that ended up not really working out the rest of the season. The next guy in this tier is going to be Keon Coleman, and I've talked about how I prefer Curtis Samuel. I prefer Curtis Samuel over Keon Coleman. You're probably not going to get that opportunity. If you love Keon Coleman, you're going to have to take him earlier. I have him here in the E tier. I don't love the overall upside. I think playing with Josh Allen is one. If he's able to catch a ton of touchdowns, be like a Mike Evans rookie level season type, that's what's going to have to pay off for you taking him at the appropriate value, because I think it's either boom or bust. I mean, we're talking Gabe Davis. It's funny that he's playing for the Buffalo Bills, essentially replacing Gabe Davis, but that is how I view Keon Coleman. Next guy in this tier is going to be Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison put up an absolutely amazing rookie level season for the Minnesota Vikings. The biggest worry for him is that now, instead of playing with Kirk Cousins for a few games, he's going to play with Sam Darnold. And we saw Jordan Addison kind of fall off without Kirk Cousins. So that is a little bit of the concern, is where are you valuing him? I still think he's a talented wide receiver. So that's why I have him here in the E tier. Next guy's going to be Cortland Sutton. It's pretty much Cortland Sutton and Marvin Mims, with the Broncos getting rid of Jerry Jeudy this year. With Bo Nix as a rookie level wide quarterback, how is that going to impact Cortland Sutton and his overall value? We shall see. But I do have Cortland Sutton here in the E tier. Next guy in the E tier is going to be Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy finds himself on this Cleveland Browns offense. As much as we talked about like the pros of a guy like Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy probably slides in as the third receiving option behind David Njoku. And can Deshaun Watson support 3 fantasy football assets as receivers? We shall see. I'm not super bullish on it, but I do have him here in the E tier because I do think he has the talent and the pedigree and the profile to get there. It just has been a very slow start to his career, and that's of course why he's on the Cleveland Browns instead of with the Denver Broncos still. Next guy's going to be Jalen Polk, turning heads at the Patriots camp. Jalen Polk, I think, is going to be the clear wide receiver one, drafted out of the 3rd round, out to the University of Washington. Listen, Jacoby Brissett is going to be the starter coming out into the season, but eventually Drake May will be taking over. So I do like Jalen Polk as a late round dart throw. And we're starting to get into juicy territory. Josh Palmer is the next guy. We talked about Ladd at the beginning of the tier. Josh Palmer will be the X in this Chargers offense. I think there is a lot of opportunity for these Chargers receivers. I just don't know how the talent is going to jump into those opportunities. So that is why I have Josh Palmer here entering and leading the last player in this E tier. We're going to move on to the F tier. We move on to the F tier, and we have Jacoby Myers, Gabe Davis, Tyler Lockett, Adam Thielen, Rome Odunze, Tavion Wicks, Josh Downs, Xavier Legette, J-Mo, and Darnell Mooney. And I'll say this, if you get to this tier and you still need a ton of wide receivers, we're not feeling great, but I do think there are great values here. Jacoby Myers with Gardner Minshew. I know I talked about how I don't love that quarterback play for him, but last year he performed with Jimmy G and performed with Aiden O'Connell. So I think Jacoby Myers, this could be a value, a discount. We probably could debate putting Jacoby Myers in the E tier. Like I said, you kind of get to these parts where the tiers kind of start to really melt themselves. And so you get to do you and you get to do your drafts. Next guy's going to be Gabe Davis. Got the contract for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, taking him this early, we know Gabe Davis is boom or bust, but we know that Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk, they're higher up on the priority chart for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I will say, you might debate taking some of these other guys ahead of Gabe Davis, but it's big play Gabe, and he got the big contract extension. So I know they want to use him in this overall offense, but I do have him here. Next guy's going to be Tyler Lockett. And last year, Tyler Lockett outperformed JSN. So there's a party that might say, hey, Caleb, I much prefer Tyler Lockett over JSN. That's up to you. Tyler Lockett's another year older. It's a whole new offense. How many snaps is, JSN going to be getting in the 2 wide receiver sets compared to where Tyler Lockett was kind of overtaking him last year? A lot to be determined. I have him here in the F tier. Adam Thielen had a great year last year with the Carolina Panthers, but they brought in Deontay Johnson. So I'm a little bit worried about that, but you could be potentially getting a great flex level wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 value on Adam Thielen. Rome Odunze, we talked about how it's really hard with these offenses when we're talking about the 3rd level option. Like I just talked about with Gabe Davis, like to talk about with Tank Dell. Rome Odunze slides into the same conversation, but Rome Odunze is a top 10 wide receiver, drafted in the same pedigree of a guy like a Drake London from a few years ago, Garrett Wilson. So he is super talented. He's just competing with targets with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, two elite level wide receivers. If Rome Odunze ends up taking more snaps towards the end of the season, we could be talking about Rome Odunze being a league winner. I'm putting him here in the F tier. I feel like it's hard for me to see the glorified output that we're going to want from Rome Odunze, especially if he's not going to be able to get separation. I've seen some clips out of camp where he's more of a refined route runner, and those are things that he's developing in his rookie level season. So Rome Odunze here in the F tier. Let me know what you think of Rome down below. Dontayvion Wicks, Josh Downs, two really hyped up rookie level wide receivers last year. Going into year 2, Josh Downs dealt with that injury. I think he might potentially be out for week 1 or week 2. We'll have to see, but I still think it's a value taking him this late in draft if you can wait on him, because Josh Downs did show really a lot of signs of promise as an Indianapolis Colt rookie. Dontayvion Wicks, a lot of people are saying he's the clear one in the Green Bay Packers organization. It's a little bit of sleeper. I do like Dontayvion Wicks in the F tier. Xavier Legette, J-Mo, and Darnell Mooney are the next guys rounding out my overall F tier. And I am making another public service announcement. Khalil Shakir, actually, I totally missed his name when I was doing these tiers. I pulled out my rankings. Like I said, I'm picking players, adding them in. Khalil Shakir is ending up in the E tier, just so everyone's aware. I do know Khalil Shakir is a talent for the Buffalo Bills. A lot of people like him. I'm not as high as others on Khalil Shakir, so that's why I'm sliding him in the E tier, but he is playing in a very electric offense, so he will be in the E tier. And then we round out the draft in this G tier, and I got the best of the rest. Pop Douglas, Brandon Cooks, A.D. Mitchell, Tyler Boyd, Malachi Corley, Mike Williams, Javon Baker, Jahan Dotson, who just got traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, Michael Wilson, and Quentin Johnson. Listen, these are potential guys that could potentially be on waivers. These could be potential stashes for you. I do think A.D. Mitchell, you can make the case based on his camp play that he should be going ahead of Josh Downs. I think he's going to be more of a deep threat, and I don't know where that volume is going to play for fantasy football. So I just wanted you guys to know this is the end of my tiers and the G tiers. So let me know what you guys think of these tiers. Let me know who you're drafting. Let me know if you've already drafted. I'm super pumped to answer all your start sit questions this year. So if you haven't, put a start sit question down below for week 1. Let me answer any potential questions that you have. I'm going to be answering everything here for. We're going to do live streams every week, multiple times a week. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Turn on your post notifications so you know when I go live, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.